Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and I'm taking care of business. Joining me today is Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thanks for joining us today, Dan.
Happy to be with you, Mario.
All right, Dan, maybe you could explain something that's happening here in the next couple of weeks. Some changes, I guess, or some deadlines coming up regarding the wage and rent subsidies at the federal level. Can you explain what's going on?
Sure. Look, when Omicron was first coming on, we knew that the wage and rent subsidies were just not going to be able to keep up. Right before Christmas, the federal government really scaled back the access to the wage and rent subsidy, meaning that the vast majority of firms were no longer going to qualify. We at CFIB pushed to make sure that that didn't happen. The government did pass its legislation to scale it back, but then immediately after put temporary additional access in place to more firms. The reason this is important is that there were a few provinces that moved back into lockdown, like Ontario and Quebec and some of the Atlantic provinces. But for the most part, businesses were hit with a 50% capacity restriction prior to Christmas. That really meant that they were not going to be able to access the extra support from the wage and the rent subsidies. So the federal government, to its credit, made a change to give temporary additional access to wage and rent support to any business that was hit with either a lockdown or a 50% or greater capacity restriction. So the hair salon that had its size of customers scaled back to 50%, they now are able to access additional wage and rent support at a much better level than was the case in the past. They only have to have only a 25% decline in their revenues as opposed to a 50% decline in revenues to access support under the program as it stands. But that access, that special access, will expire. And it expires very soon on February 12th. And so many business owners are contacting us at CFIB right now saying, wait a minute, I'm still facing a 50% capacity restriction. And I'm not going to get this extra access to the wage and rent support any longer. So we're pushing the feds right now to try to make that change, to give small businesses ongoing support. But really, the principle is, it's great that some provinces are starting to talk about removing restrictions, but until they do, we need to ensure that there are adequate supports in businesses to try to replace the customers that they're losing.
Let's talk about that, Dan. You know, we were seeing signals, well, not signals, but pretty much factual reality that Saskatchewan is moving towards ending restrictions. Jason Kenney here in Alberta has said so much along the same lines as well. And what's that all going to mean? Do you think, first of all, that's going to cause a bit of a domino effect across the country for other provinces, and that we're seeing a bit of the light at the end of the tunnels, so to speak?
You and I have been talking many times over the course of COVID, and I always try to ensure that I deal with reality rather than fantasy. Yeah. But it does feel like we are very close to the end of many of the major restrictions. It's not just the Western leaders have been ahead of Eastern Canada for many months. In Saskatchewan, Alberta in particular, even British Columbia with an NDP government, they have had either lighter restrictions or shorter periods of restrictions than those of us in Russia out in Eastern Canada right now who have been facing the longest lockdowns in the entire world, like the province of Ontario. But what I take as good news is not just that Premier Moe, Premier Kenney are talking about lowering restrictions, getting rid of, in fact, most of, if not all of the COVID restrictions, including vaccine passports and perhaps one-day masking rules as well. But even out east, it's not just political leaders that are talking about it, it's also public health officials. They're now starting to talk about dismantling many of the restrictions that have been in place. The chief medical officer of Ontario has pivoted and said we have to move to a live with it strategy, that we're not going to be able to keep COVID at bay. And so I'm more optimistic than I have been at any point in the pandemic that these restrictions are going to start to come down quickly. What I'll add, though, is it's not just a matter for any government to get rid of restrictions. It's also a huge job to restore consumer confidence to get back to normal life. And I think that that's going to take months. Yes, there are some that are anxious to get out of their basement and get back to normal life, but there are others that have cocooned and are really worried still because public health officials and governments have created a sense of panic. So we're going to have to do more to try to tell people, you know what, it's safe to go back to dining, to the theater, to travel, to your office. And I suspect that will be a big issue in the months ahead.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a second here. And, you know, and I've seen it, I see it every day now, especially since Mo, and actually Mo had a little video the other day on this, and Kenny has talked about it. So I see all the threads of social media, right? And the concern is that, okay, are we doing this too early? And then, you know, guess what? Couple of months or whatever, we're back into another wave. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I have no better crystal ball than anyone else as to whether or not there's another variant that's going to come along and hit us hard. What I do know is that other places around the world are starting to, and way ahead of Canada, in moving to a live with it strategy. Does that mean that there's zero possibility of another wave coming and putting pressure once again on our healthcare system and requiring other public health measures? No, but we've got high vaccination rates. We've got treatments now that have for people that have COVID or COVID-related symptoms. At some point, we're going to have to say, you know what, even if this is causing some harm, that we're going to have to live with it, as we do with many other illnesses in society right now. We don't shut down the economy because we have, unfortunately, some people that are catching contagious diseases. We're going to have to do that soon. I know that one of the biggest stumbling blocks has been Canada's razor-thin ICU capacity. That's a problem, gosh, we should have been working to solve over the course of the past 2 years. I know you can't turn it on a dime, but certainly we could have done better.
Yeah.
My point is, though, like, you know, when you look at what's happening around the world, during Omicron, the US didn't throw in, even in the most liberal of jurisdictions, didn't start to throw in 1 million new restrictions. They kept their economy, kept their schools open. Canada worked in the other direction in most parts of our nation.
One last thing I want to ask you, can't let you go without asking you about the truckers.
Sure.
The situation on Parliament Hill and downtown Ottawa, the situation in Alberta at Coots and the blockade. What is the opinion of I guess in this the feelings that CFIB has towards what's happening in the country right now with the truckers' protests?
Well, look, the issue that inspired the protest among truckers, we share their concern. That was the application of a truckers' mandate. I think it's the most ridiculous policy I've seen in a long time. For one thing, we're talking right now about lowering COVID restrictions. The majority of small business want restrictions lowered or gone, not raised. The public seems to be on that side as well. Provinces are moving in that direction, and yet the federal government, who has kept cross-border trucking exempt from all sorts of mandates and procedures because it's an essential service, they decided that now was the time to start to throw on a mandate for truckers. I got to tell you, I have way greater likelihood of getting Omicron from my 13-year-old who's in school every day than I do from a long-haul trucker who's sitting alone in their cab. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. So if we're looking at COVID policies that work and not just COVID theater, this seems unlikely that we would ever choose as a nation to put in place a mandate for truckers, especially at a time when supply chains are so strained across the country, costs going through the roof, and shelves that are bare, not just for consumers, but if your business is unable to get an important input, this is really putting pressure on you. So this core issue is there. Now, the only thing I will add is for those that are in the trucking community that started the protest, and for some that have jumped on to the bandwagon because they're tired of the restrictions, like me, I worry that, in fact, by some of their actions, we're actually limiting other people's freedoms at the moment. And that's not good. I had Ottawa spa, that contacted me that said that their appointments, they had 75% to 90% cancellations. They're just opening this week for the first time in a month, and now they're closed again. It looks like there's some traffic passing in Coutts, which is good, but once again, but to shut down the businesses that depend on, in the Ottawa downtown or on cross-border shipments happening at Coutts, in the name of freedom, removing freedom seems counterintuitive, and that part needs to change.
Yeah. All right. Super. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate your time again.
All right. Thanks, Mario.
All right. That was Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. I'm Mario Toneguzzi. This has been Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining me today.